thank you so much for coming here this evening. We've got a great lineup beginning with Mr. Ram Guha and going through for the rest of the week. Before we start, I thought I'd just give you guys a brief on the Spring Fever itself. This was started about 8 years back, and the objective of this evening and for the week was to give you, our readers, the opportunity in an engaged platform to meet with the authors you guys so love. It takes a lot of effort and time to put together an event, even though it's not in the scale of the Jaipur Lit Fest, for example, but the amount of time, effort, energy really is quite large. And I'd like to thank Himali Sodhi and her wonderful team, who is our children's publisher and Senior VP Marketing. This was actually her brainchild, and she started this off, as I said, 8 years ago, and I think it's really become a great platform to kick off the spring season in Delhi with. As I said, we've got a great lineup this coming week. I'm actually going to read it out to you because there's quite a number of authors coming in. This evening, Mr. Guha, of course, will speak to us for about half an hour, 45 minutes. Hopefully, if he's engaged enough with the crowd, you guys will keep him on for about an hour and a half. We've also got Sunil Kalnani coming in tomorrow. Sunil has written a book called Incarnations, which you all must have a pick up and read off. It's about 50 lives of Indians running through from the Buddha to Mukesh Ambani. So it's a wide spectrum. We've also got Neeraj Kumar, the former Commissioner of Police, coming in later this week. Hindol Sengupta, Anand Kumar of Super 30. We've got Shashi Tharoor, Srijan Pal Singh, who worked very closely with our late President Abdul Kalam. We've got Nawazuddin Siddiqui, who's going to be coming in as well. Shilpa Shetty, Kundra, Payal Gidwani Tiwari, who are going to be talking to us about fitness and diet. We've got Twinkle Khanna, who's going to be coming in for a book signing for her book, Mrs. Funnybones, which is a great book, in case you guys haven't read it. Sonali Bendre and Imran Hashmi, whose book is going to be released in April, and that is an absolute must-read. It's about his relationship with his son, who was diagnosed with cancer, and that journey and how he's recovered. And it's a very touching, very, very touching story. And of course, we will finally finish off this great week with Gulzar, who will be here on Sunday. So do spread the word, and hope to see you guys back. And have a great evening. Thank you. Sorry, the most important thing. I'd like to invite Udayan Mitra to get Mr. Ram Guha onto stage.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Spring Fever 2016. My name is Udayan Mitra. I am Associate Publisher at Penguin Random House, and my duty this evening is, you basically want me off stage as quickly as possible so Ram can come on. So I'll try to be as brief as possible, but my pleasurable duty is to quickly introduce Ram to you. Not that he needs any introduction for this audience or indeed for any audience in India and abroad. But just to say, Ramchandra Guha, India's leading historian and a well-known biographer. You will know him as the author of India After Gandhi, which is possibly the best book on the history of post-independence India, and For Corner of a Foreign Field, which is by far, I think, the best book ever written on cricket in India. Ram has taught at Yale, Stanford, Berkeley. He is a recipient of the Ramnath Goenka Prize for Excellence in Journalism, the R.K. Narayan Prize, the Sahitya Academy Award, and also the Padma Bhushan. At Penguin, we are privileged to have published Makers of Modern India, his book of essays, Patriots and Partisans, and the first part of his Gandhi biography, magnum opus, which is called Gandhi Before India, The second and final part of the Gandhi Biography Project publishes in early 2018. We are all keenly looking forward to that. We also publish almost the entirety of Ram's backlist, and you have the books. Some of them are also available in Hindi. All of them are here. Now, this evening, Ram will be speaking on the challenge of contemporary history, and this is a talk which will be, as Gaurav mentioned, followed by an interactive session with you all, so you can just ask him questions on what he's talking about. I wanted to mention that the talk is, in a way, connected with the book that he's publishing with us later this year. In October this year, we are publishing this book called Democrats and Dissenters. Now, this is a major new collection of essays from Ram on topics of contemporary interest, and it's written with Ram's trademark depth of research, his elegance, wit, and the essays cover a wide range of themes, and I'll just mention a couple. The varying national projects of India's neighbors, the political debates within India, the responsibility of writers today in this charged climate, and the tragic predicament of tribals. So just 4 topics, and I'm sure Ram will touch on some of these in his talk. So it's my pleasurable duty once again to invite Ram Guha on stage, and he will be speaking on the challenge of contemporary history. Thank you.
Thank you, Udayan. Thank you, Gaurav. Thank you all for coming here. When I was a student in this lovely city 40 years ago, in the hostel, if a friend was looking for me, he said, "Have you seen or heard Ram?" So this is really a first that I couldn't be heard in an audience like this. Anyway, I'm going to speak to you on the challenge of contemporary history. And I'm going to begin with a paradox. The paradox is that while India is the most interesting country in the world, we know so little about its contemporary history. Sunil Khilnani, who's going to speak to you tomorrow, says in his book, The Idea of India, that there have been 3 great democratic revolutions. The American Revolution, I beg your pardon, the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and the Indian Revolution. And of these 3 great democratic revolutions, the Indian Revolution may be the most important, but it's certainly the least written about. We have thousands of books written on the French and the American revolutions. The Indian Revolution, of course, is the most recent. It dates only to 1947. It also occurs in a continent, Asia, not previously known as a beacon of liberty or freedom. Indeed, many parts of Asia today are still groaning under authoritarian communist or military regimes. So it's relatively recent, but 70 years, in my view, is a fairly long time for a decent literature to accumulate on the various contours of India's complicated, tortuous, always intriguing journey since independence. But there are very few books written on the history of independent India, on any aspect of the history of independent India. And the books that are written not by historians, but by sociologists, political scientists, and anthropologists. And there's an extraordinary contrast here with the stories of post-war France, post-war America, post-war Britain, where you find indeed not just shelves but whole libraries of books written by historians about the post-war modern experience of these countries. Now, why is this so? That's all right, it's only Rajya Sabha TV, so I'm happy to be on Rajya Sabha TV. Why is this so? I think in history writing in India, there's been an obsession with the colonial period. Now, I would like to say that there are many fine historians who write on India, both Indians and foreigners, teaching both in our universities around India and across the world. So Indian history is a thriving, rich, productive field. But much of it, in my view, too much of it focuses on the colonial period. That is, from the Battle of Plassey in 1757 to partition in 1947. There's been an obsession with colonialism, with economic impact of colonialism, the political impact of colonialism, the social impact of colonialism, and of course, on colonialism's other nationalism, the different forms of resistance to British authority, elite resistance, peasant resistance, workers' resistance, the great heroic figures of our freedom struggle, Gandhi, Nehru, Ambedkar, lesser currents, for example, those, or lesser known currents, for example, those associated with the revolutionary terrorists such as Bhagat Singh, the mystery of Subhash Bose. So whether you're dealing with colonialism or with nationalism, there's an extraordinary interest, obsession, manifested, of course, in popular discourse, but also in serious scholarly work. If you were to take the volumes of subaltern studies, which is the most influential movement of Indian historians, they published 10 volumes, about 80 articles. At least 70 are on the period from Plassey to partition. If you do a similar study of the PhD theses in the history departments of our best universities, such as JNU, you'll reach a similar conclusion. Now, in recent years, there's been a criticism of this obsession with colonialism and nationalism made by historians to the effect that this neglects the period before colonialism, which in fact was often very interesting and intriguing, the early modern period, the 16th and the 17th centuries. And there's been first-rate work over the last 8 or 10 years by historians writing on the 16th and the 17th centuries before the period of the British Raj. But I'm more concerned with what comes afterwards. It is true that the focus on colonialism and nationalism has led to the neglect of the pre-colonial period. But it's also led to a neglect by historians, in my view, perhaps even more serious, of the post-colonial period. And that's the point of departure for my essay. The paradox that while the Indian experience with democracy and nationhood is an extraordinarily rich and interesting and remarkable one, there's been so little written about this history, the Indian Revolution, as compared to the vast corpus of writings on, shall we say, the American or the French revolutions. So that's the paradox I'm starting with. Why is this so? Well, one of the reasons is that when you write about the recent past, as a scholar, you face a series of complicated challenges. And I'm going to share with you 4 major challenges to the contemporary historian. If I want to write about 1900 or 1500 or 500 AD, I don't face these challenges. What are the challenges that a contemporary historian faces? The first challenge is that the reader of his or her books is not a passive recipient of the text. If I was writing a book on the period of the Emperor Ashoka, you would approach it as a reader out of curiosity. You wouldn't have preformed opinions about what Ashoka stood for or what the Maurya stood for. On the other hand, when you write about the recent past, your reader has his or her own opinions, especially about political figures. Because we live with the consequences of decisions taken by modern politicians, we presume we know all about them. Over the last 10 or 15 years, I've had the privilege of speaking about Jawaharlal Nehru to many different audiences. Now, Jawaharlal Nehru was a very important figure in the making of modern India. I should say immediately that he is not to be blamed for the sins of his descendants. As my esteemed teacher, the great sociologist Andre Bete likes to say, the posthumous career of Jawaharlal Nehru reverses a biblical injunction. In the Bible it is said, the sins of the father will be visited on 7 successive generations. In the case of Nehru, the sins of 7 successive generations have been retrospectively visited on him. So, I've been speaking about Nehru to different audiences. I've spoken about Nehru's complicated and complex and contested legacy to business houses, to students, to activist groups. And everywhere, wherever I've spoken to Nehru, in whichever city or state of our land, to whatever kind of audience, whatever may be its social profile, I've met people in this audience, I've met people in my audience who would have been better prime ministers than Nehru. Wherever I've gone, I'm sure there are people in this audience who, if they had been prime minister instead of Nehru, would have solved the Kashmir problem, would have defeated China in the 62 war, would have taken India on a growth path of 10% from 1947 onwards, would have solved caste and communal problems, and so on and so forth. And in this, you would be totally representative. Wherever I go and speak about Nehru, I meet such people. Now, the further back you go in the past, the less of a problem it is. I mentioned Ashoka, who is the subject of a wonderful recent biography by my friend and colleague, Professor Nainjot Lahiri. And those of you who are interested either in biography or in ancient history, please buy that book, even though it's not published by Penguin. But Professor Lahiri has a great advantage over me, because when she speaks about Ashoka, no one in the audience is going to lecture her about Ashoka. Right. Now, that's the first challenge, that in the case of contemporary history, the reader is also a citizen, a critical citizen, with his or her own ideological and social preferences. Even before you offer them your history, they know all about it. You may write a 500-page book, replete with hundreds of footnotes based on your careful research. But they'll approach that text already knowing what this book about Nehru or Patel or Ambedkar or states reorganization or the unification of India is all about. So that's the first challenge, that your reader, the first challenge to the contemporary historian, that the reader, the potential reader, has her own very strongly entrenched views and prejudices even before she opens your book. The second challenge is that the historian is also a citizen. When I write about Nehru or Ambedkar or Patel, when I write about partition, when I write about the India-China War of 1962, when I write about the Andhra movement of 1953, or the anti-Hindi agitation of the DMK in Madras in 1965, I also have certain perceptions or misperceptions, because I've read about it, I've discussed it. So, which is very unlikely to be the case if I'm writing as a historian about the distant past. So the reader has his or her prejudices. The historian also is not completely blank when writing about the recent past. The third challenge is the density of sources. One of the reasons that there's so much work on the colonial period is that the British were obsessive record keepers, and they kept most of their files. Our governments either don't keep files or shred them. Right, before they demit office, they shred them. Or even if they keep them and do not shred them, they don't transfer it to the National Archives. So if you go to the National Archives or to a state archive anywhere, you go to the West Bengal State Archive in Kolkata, you go to the Maharashtra State Archive in Mumbai, you go to UP State Archive in Lucknow, all places I have worked, and you look at their records. The records are overwhelmingly of the colonial period. They're 18th and 19th century records. And a historian needs primary sources to work with. So one of the reasons there's so much work on the colonial period is that the material is all there. Whereas for the recent past, the sources are scanty, imperfectly kept, and sometimes not available at all. And let me give the example again of Nehru. Nehru wrote a great deal. His private papers are in the control of his family. Only 5 scholars, 3 foreigners and 2 Indians, have been allowed to consult them. I am not one of them. Indira Gandhi's papers are closed completely. No one has ever seen them. Vajpayee's papers, no one knows whether they exist or not. Whereas in most democratic countries, the papers of retired or dead politicians are properly archived, properly filed, and made accessible to scholars. And I'm talking here about papers that deal with their political life. If I want to study Nehru, I want to study him as a politician, as a prime minister. I'm not interested in his romantic relationships. I'm happy if you close the Lady Mountbatten papers. But not only are the Lady Mountbatten papers closed, so will be the Kashmir and the China papers. Likewise with Vajpayee. Vajpayee was an immensely charming man, had romantic relationships. I'm not interested in that because I don't think that affected his prime ministership. But his other papers would also be closed. So Indians are paranoid about records. So records are scarce, and this is compounded by the fact that Indians are paranoid about records. And of course, we live in a climate, a monsoonal climate, where records disintegrate too. So that's challenge number 3. Challenge number 1, the reader is an engaged, excessively engaged reader. Challenge number 2, the historian of contemporary India is more prejudiced himself than a historian of ancient India. Challenge number 3, the sources are scanty compared to earlier periods. And the challenge number 4, which is a peculiarly Indian challenge and has to do with the definition of disciplinary boundaries in an Indian university. When the clock struck midnight on 15th August 1947, history ended and political science began. Right? Okay. So historians don't deal with the post-47 period because that's the province of the political scientists. Incidentally, I don't know, many people in this audience may not know that I've never done a degree in history, which maybe I can't get a job in JNU, but I can still write books. Because I didn't do a degree in history, my degrees are in economics and sociology, I was able to work from the first book I ever wrote, which was a history of forestry in the Himalaya. It started in the 1890s and ended in the 1970s. Because, this conception that on 15th August, history ended 47 and political science began. Fortunately, I wasn't burdened by this. But most historians are. If you're a sociologist, and you go, or a political scientist, and you go to your supervisor and say, I want to work on 19th century constitutionalism, your supervisor will say that is history. If you're a historian and you go to your supervisor and say, I want to work on the Bastar, tribals in Bastar in the 1960s, they will say that is anthropology or political science. So this is a real genuine problem that is apart from the other problems. The other problems are universal. If I was an American historian writing about the 1960s, the Vietnam War, I would face the problem of an engaged reader, the problem of an engaged scholar, and the lack of density of sources. But I wouldn't face this ridiculous problem where the difference between one discipline and another is determined by a single date. Now, these are 4 reasons, 4 challenges to the writing of contemporary history in India, and 4 reasons why, compared to the vast corpus of books on the colonial period, there are so few serious historical works on contemporary history. For example, if you consider the 2 themes that define the history of independent India since 1947 till today, if I was to look at 2 sociological categories, 2 words that capture our history, our complicated and tortuous history, more succinctly than any other words, these 2 words would be caste and elections. Caste and elections. We have had 16 gendered elections, countless state elections. It is universally acknowledged that amidst all the malfunctioning or dysfunctioning or non-functioning governmental institutions, the Election Commission holds free and fair elections. It is acknowledged that caste is a salient feature of Indian life. And this acknowledgement of the importance of elections and the importance of caste is felt by political scientists and anthropologists. So every election since 1952 has been carefully studied by political scientists. Anthropologists have done field work on caste in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, in the 2000s. But there's not a single book on changes in the caste system since 47, which are profound and very interesting. There's not a single book on how, since 1952, when we held our first elections, what have been the changes in forms of electoral financing, forms of election campaigning, changes in the party system, changes across India in the way in which different regions have voted or not voted. So we do not have a historian's diachronic perspective on either caste or on education or on election, even though these are the two most important aspects of our daily life as Indians. We do not have biographies of our key figures. We do have, for example, books on Nehru or on Patel. But we don't have books on some remarkable individuals in independent India. Take the leaders of states. Take a person like Sheikh Abdullah. Sheikh Abdullah was identified with the history of Kashmir from 1946 till his death 40 years, 50 years, more than 40 years later. You cannot understand the history of modern Kashmir or the history of India or the history of Pakistan without Sheikh Abdullah. There is no good scholarly biography of Sheikh Abdullah. Think of a person like E.M.S. Namboodiripad in Kerala, or Fizo, the great Naga leader, or Master Tara Singh, the famous Akali leader. The history of Punjab is deeply interwoven till today with the legacy of Tara Singh. The history of Nagaland cannot be understood without what Fizo did or did not do. But there are no biographies of these people. Because we say these are provincial leaders. But the province is as large as a European country. Not to have a biography of E.M.S. Namboodiripad or of Y.B. Chavan of Maharashtra, another remarkable figure in our post-independence history. Not to have a biography of Y.B. Chavan is like not having a biography of Charles de Gaulle and your French. To be a Maharashtrian and not have a solid scholarly assessment of what Chavan meant for the history of Maharashtra, or what Morarji Desai meant for the history of Gujarat and India, is really a massive deficiency in our historical knowledge. And if you move from politics to the arts, there's no biography of M.S. Subbulakshmi, of M.F. Hussain, of Ravi Shankar. I'm not talking about gossipy works by people who are in and around them. I'm talking about serious scholarly stuff. Of the great Kannada writer Shivaram Karant, one of my own favorites. Of business. The only biography of J.R.D. Tata is written by a chamcha. That be true of the biography of M.S. Oberoi or anyone else. The only good scholarly book on a businessman is Meda Malik's book on G.D. Birla, published by the Oxford University Press. So whether it be politics, whether it be the arts, whether it be business, whether it be sport, we don't have biographies. There are no histories of states. How many people here are from Bengal? All right, so let me take Bengal. By the way, I'm not Bengali, even though I'm Guha. But let me take Bengal. Now, if you look at the history of Bengal since the 1940s, it's an incredibly interesting history. You had the backdrop of partition. In the 50s, you had refugee resettlement, which led to the rise of left politics. In the 60s, you had famine, food scarcity, Naxalism. In the 70s, you had the emergency. In the 80s, you had the rise of the left front and Panchayati Raj. In the 90s, you had the complicated debates about, economic liberalization. In the 2000s, you had the major challenge to the left front through the Trinamool Congress. Accompanying these political and economic challenges, there were a whole host of literary and artistic activities. In the 50s, you had Satyajit Ray. In the 60s, you had Minal Sen. You had, in the 70s and 80s, you had writers like Mahashweta Devi. You had musicians. Wouldn't you, as a Bengali, want to read a good history of Bengal since 1947? You will find at least 50 or 100 good histories of France since 1947. You will find 500 theses on colonial Bengal. You know, the Bengalis, like the rest of us, are obsessed with the colonial period. And Bengal produces the most historians, and all of them only write about colonialism. And I don't mean to single out the Bengalis. I come from Karnataka. We've also had a fascinating history. The 50s was the movement when we created a unified state from 4 parts. In the 60s, we had land reforms. In the 70s, we had the rise of the Dalit movement, which is very important in Karnataka, unlike in West Bengal. In the 80s, you had the first glimmerings of the IT movement. You had linguistic conflicts. Then you had, of course, the famous disputes with Tamil Nadu. I would like, as a resident of Karnataka, to have a good book that allows me to understand the history of my state since its formation in 1956. And each of our states, I'd like to underline, are like large European countries. We don't have them. We don't have good histories of economic policy, of foreign policy, of entertainment. Now, the question is, can these histories be written? Of course they can. Although government sources are closed, there are other kinds of sources. The Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, which is my home away from home, and which is where I spend my days when I'm in Delhi, and have done for the last 30 years, has some 800 collections of private papers. It has newspapers, which are an incredibly valuable primary source from all over India. In the Nehru Museum, you will get Bengali newspapers from the 50s, Kannada newspapers from the 60s, Urdu newspapers from the 70s. So even if government sources are closed, the private papers of many individuals are open, the newspapers are available, court records are often a valuable source, oral histories, the closer you come to the past. If you're studying the 1960s, you can conduct oral histories. So you can, you do have the sources to write fine contemporary histories. And some of these are being written. I'll just single out a few books that have been published over the last 5 or 10 years, which will give you a sense of the kind of histories that can be written. And some of these books are the product of a foundation I'm associated with, the New India Foundation, which that was set up to promote research and writing on contemporary Indian history. There's a wonderful book by a journalist called Harish Damodaran called India's New Capitalists. It was published by Palgrave Macmillan some years ago and by Permanent Black. It's probably still available. I'll tell you what it does. It is a history of the deepening of India's business community after independence. Traditionally, most businessmen in India come from the Baniya community and from family-owned businesses. But from the 60s and 70s, new kinds of people started entering the entrepreneurial class. Most importantly, farmers who had benefited from the Green Revolution turned their hand to agriculture, to industry. So that you had the Marathas of Western India starting sugar mills. You had the Gaundas, who are a peasant caste of Tamil Nadu, starting textile mills. Tirupur, which is the banyan capital of the world. All the factories are run by Gaundas, who are a peasant caste. In Kerala, you had Iravas, who are traditionally untouchable, taking to entrepreneurship. In Agra, the Chamars, also traditionally untouchable, started leather industries. So across southern and western India, you had the deepening of the business community by the entrance of new kinds of players or middle class people. Infosys was set up by people from families which have no business background at all. But this did not happen in northern India, in Punjab and in Haryana, where the Green Revolution was extremely successful. Somehow you didn't have a transformation of peasants into capitalists. Business remained in a stranglehold of the Banyas. Now this is a fascinating book which weaves in the history of the Green Revolution with the changing forms of industrialization in India. It tells you a great deal about modern India. A second book, and then I'll move on, is a book called The Gita Press and the Making of Modern India, written by a person called Akshay Mukul. And it's a fascinating account of a press called the Gita Press, based in Gorakhpur, which publishes editions of the Gita, religious literature, calendars, and for many years ran a very influential Hindi magazine called Kalyan, which defined what is the ideal Hindu woman, what she can or cannot do, what is the ideal Hindu man, how India or Hindus can become great again. I mean, the entire ideological and cultural infrastructure of the Hindutva movement was created by the Gita Press and its publications. And Akshay Mukul, for the first time, provides a subterranean intellectual and publishing history of a very influential political and ideological movement in independent India. Now, it's no accident that Akshay Mukul and Harish Damodaran are journalists. Because if they had done a PhD in history in one of our universities, they'd been told, what you're doing is political science, it's not history. But I hope and I think that these prejudices are slowly going to be, how do I put it, dismantled, changed, and we will begin to have the kind of attention paid to our recent history, to our complicated recent history, that this history deserves. I began by saying that India is the most interesting country in the world. I made that claim before. Some of you may be familiar with it. I would want to underline that when I say India is the most interesting country in the world, I mean to say, I do not mean to make a chauvinist or jingoist claim. It's a factual remark. India can also be the most exasperating country in the world, the most disgusting country in the world. If I was a woman, I would rather live in Sweden or Norway, where I would be treated with dignity, than here. If I was a working class person, likewise. But why is India the most interesting country in the world? India is the most interesting country in the world because it is both an unnatural nation and an unlikely democracy. Never before in human history was a territory so large, so diverse, so disparate, sought to be consolidated as a single political unit, and never before in human history was a population largely poor, largely illiterate, granted the vote. And India is undergoing, as I argue in my book, Bakers of Modern India, India is undergoing 5 simultaneous revolutions. The political revolution, whereby from a society based on the power of a feudal elite, now every citizen has a vote. A national revolution, whereby from a nation ruled by a foreigner, you have got Swaraj. An industrial revolution, whereby an economy largely based on agriculture is becoming more industrial. An urban revolution, whereby settlement patterns based on the village are becoming more and more city-based. And finally, a social revolution, where traditional hierarchies, particularly of caste and gender, are being challenged and undermined. And India is undergoing these 5 revolutions simultaneously, unlike other countries. In other countries in the world, these revolutions were staggered. America had its national revolution in 1776, when they declared independence from the British colonialists. America had its urban and industrial revolution in the 19th century, its political revolution in the 18th century, its urban and industrial revolution in the 19th century, and its social revolution only in the 20th century. In fact, it was only as late as the 1960s that African Americans got the right to vote. So we're extraordinarily large, we're extraordinarily diverse, and we are undergoing these 5 revolutions. I mean, that's why India is the most interesting country in the world. And that's why, as a historian, I'm privileged to be born in India. I mean, I could spend 5 lifetimes writing about these 5 revolutions. So, India is the most interesting country in the world. It's the most daring, the most reckless political experiment in human history. And it is our country, which is why we need to know more about it, much more about it, than we do so far. Thank you very much. So I think we have quite a lot of time for questions. Yeah. So, yeah, you're here. Yeah.
Hello, sir. I'm Shan from Stages JNU,
Yeah.
and we have continuous mail exchanges.
Huh?
I think you recognize me from our continuous mail exchanges.
Sure. Go ahead.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Yeah.
So, I think this paper you have published in the pages of EPW for quite some time.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting. I was wondering this historian and citizen dichotomy which you always talk about.
Yeah.
So, looking at the contemporary times, how people who occupy a liberal and central position
Yeah,
like you
yeah.
on the ideological spectrum
Yeah.
are being continuously encroached by more of extremists.
Yeah.
So how you propose to resolve this crisis when history is being also attacked by we versus they dichotomy?
Yeah. No, I think this is, your question allows me to explain something I didn't in my talk. You see, when I talk about contemporary history, by that I mean, when can history become reliable? When you have some distance. The question is, how much distance? How important is the current controversy over JNU? Right. We don't know. We take positions very quickly based on what we think, but we'll only know in 5 or 10 or 15 years from now. I believe, as a student of contemporary history, that you need a generation's distance to understand the significance of a historical event or a historical controversy. So, I was a student in Delhi during the emergency, but it took me about 30 years to understand the significance of the emergency. Likewise, today, I can understand what the Babri Masjid movement did to politics and society in India. So, but a generation's distance means 1990, not 1947. So the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s are fair game for historians. The closer you come to the present, the more the citizen, the activist, the impressionistic analysis take over. So I am a citizen, I am a kind of commentator on current events. I don't know how many of my verdicts or judgments will stand the test of time. That will only be known 10 or 15 years from now. So the first thing I'd like to say in response to your question is that a historian needs some distance, but 20 years of distance is enough. And the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s were 4 of the most fascinating decades in our history, as interesting as the 20s or 30s, but understudied. On your other question which you raised about liberalism amidst the extremes, that's my fate. I'm usually attacked by the rightists. I wrote a column 2 weeks ago where I said, this is not the emergency and this is not Hitler, and now it's the leftists who are jumping on me. Right. So it's a pleasant change. It's nice to be attacked by a different group for a change. You see, it's like this, that extremists shout loudest. One of my favorite moments watching Arnab Goswami, whom I haven't watched for about 3 years, was where he actually said, and this is completely true, you have to believe me, I was flipping Chandra Soy when some people were shouting, he said, wait a minute, only 2 at a time, please. I swear, this is what he said. All right, okay. Now, only 2 it's completely, okay. It's not only, now, you see, the extremists shout loudest. They're also more certain because they think in black and white. They're possessed of the truth. But the nuance and the complexity is what, you should, and I think that's what students should be taught by their teachers, not to take extreme positions. And unfortunately, there are too many of our teachers who are either left-wing ideologues or right-wing ideologues. I'm sorry to say this. And, I will fight the ground fiercely. I call myself a polemical moderate. I sometimes say, I'm a man of moderate opinions. These sometimes expressed in extreme fashion. Because it's important for liberals and moderates not to cede the ground to the shrieking banshees or the left or the right. Because the fact is that moderation, dialogue, compromise is what sustained and has sustained Indian democracy and Indian pluralism. I mean, if you look at our great leaders, if you look at Gandhi, Nehru, Ambedkar, that is what they abhorred the extremes. They disagreed in different ways. But I think that a country as diverse, as plural, as complicated, as driven by discord as ours, needs understanding, tolerance. It does not need certitude. I think certitude is a danger to understanding the complexity of our country. And as I said, I mean, I'm happy to. It's a welcome change to be attacked by leftists for me, in this case, because usually it's the right-wing fundamentalists who go for me. Yeah, you are.
So carrying on from what you said, are we perhaps paying today for what has transpired over the last 3 decades at least, or 4 decades, post-independence, maybe longer, 5 decades, where anybody who is extreme right has been slapped on the wrist rather than being engaged with in the moderate, but I will defend moderation fashion that you advocate. Where now they've been feeling so neglected that now reason has been thrown to the wind and polemics taken over.
What you say is, it's sometimes said of Hindus that they're a majority with a minority complex. When Anupam Kher says, I'm afraid to be a Hindu, I recently read a book, by the way, about the persecution of Buddhist monks in communist ruled Cambodia. So I find it mystifying that the rights think they play themselves as victims. I mean, they're not. We are 85% of this country, for God's sake. So that's the first thing. Second thing, there is some element of truth in their criticism that the universities were colonized by leftists. That has to change. But that can't change if your principal intellectual spokesman is Anupam Kher. Still less Praveen Togadia. Or Smriti Irani. Right. So, okay. Now, of course it must change. So it must change. I have an essay in the book that Udayan mentioned. I have it in the book of essays that's coming out later this year. I have a long essay called Why Are There No Conservative Intellectuals in India? That is a puzzle. There are conservative intellectuals in Germany, in France, in England and America. We do need conservative intellectuals. But intellectual work is hard work. Appearing on Arnab Goswami's show does not make you an intellectual. Sending tweets does not make you an intellectual. Writing newspaper articles does not make you an intellectual. You have to do careful, serious, rigorous work. Then you will be taken seriously. Of course we need conservative intellectuals. And I wrote in this essay that unfortunately, you see, the founders of the RSS were the most profoundly anti-intellectual people. Someone like Golwalkar was just a garden variety of bigot. Now, we had a great conservative, Rajagopalachari, and we can't draw from his work on the restraints to be imposed on the state. So the state does not include the citizen. The importance of family and community and spiritualism in sustaining social life. But he was a profound and complicated thinker. And, somebody has recently started a magazine in Madras claiming to uphold Rajaji's legacy. But after reading that magazine for a year, I find that they're combining the economics of Rajaji with the politics of Amit Shah. So we do need right-wing intellectuals, you're right. That the left has for too long dominated. But you have to throw up better people. You cannot think that, Smriti Irani or Anupam Kher are going to provide credibility. You only drag our discourse further and further into the mud. So you have to do intellectual work is hard work. It requires rigor, sophistication, deep study, research, analysis, serious thinking. And we did have those. In that essay of mine, I talk about conservative intellectuals we had in the first half of the 20th century. I've mentioned some. The historian Radha Kumud Mukherjee, the sociologist G.S. Ghurye. These were serious conservative intellectuals. They did serious and rigorous work. But to get them, you'll have to adopt different methods. I think the BJP is the most anti-intellectual party, sadly. It may have other merits, but respect for scholarship is not one of them. Yeah, you had. Anyone else have a question? Yeah. That lady there. Yeah. I'll come back. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Sir, I wanted to ask you a social question.
Yeah.
Our fondness for breaking the rule of the law.
Yeah.
And also, at the drop of a hat, rushing to jails. Is it the legacy of our colonial past, or
rushing to?
Rushing to jails? Everybody is very fond of going to jail. Maybe they get protection there.
Yeah.
Is it the legacy of the British Raj? Or is it that we are still growing and therefore we have not understood the dynamics of this?
No, I think it's the latter.
And
It's
so
the-
my second question
No,
is...
only one question. Next question, please. Yeah. Next person, yeah. That lady there, yeah. I think it's largely the latter. I don't think, I think the British have been gone so long, let's stop blaming them. Let's take responsibility for our own mistakes. We've been around long enough to make them. Yeah.
Hello, sir. My
And by the way, what I say about the British applies tenfold about the Mughals or any of our earlier rulers. We are just lamenting. If you are a proud nation, take pride in your own mistakes. Yeah.
hello, sir. My name is Ankita Mukhopadhyay.
Yeah.
I did my master's at the International History Department of the London School of Economics.
Yeah.
And our most popular course amongst the students there was a course called Political Islam from Ibn Taymiyyah to Osama bin Laden. And one of my American friends wanted to do her master's thesis on the Obama intel on the Osama attack. So I remember the professor telling her very clearly that anything post 2003 is not history. It is contemporary political science. That's the word she used. And I remember my friend saying she had a background in drama. She was not a student of history, and she said that, but can't we analyze anything post 2003 with a historical lens, historical point of view? So don't you feel that as students, like even students of history, like from any background, political science, sociology, anthropology, don't we ourselves impose a timeline when we are doing the study of history? Isn't that also a problem, because we ourselves feel that anything beyond 2003 or...
No, I think the professor made a wise remark. I mean, as I said, I'm even more conservative than the professor. I say 20 years, your professor said 10 years, right? So I think it doesn't mean you don't do it. You do it. You can study what happened in the last 10 years, but it means that you're likely to be much more constrained by not having an overarching framework, not having distance, having not inadequate sources, and being inflected by your own prejudices and what you've learned. I think the important thing about history is every work of history is only part of a conversation. No work of history is definitive. But some works are less imperfect than others. And that depends on how much rigor, how much research, and how much distance. So the professor who said you can study the growth of political Islam, shall we say, up to the Muslim Brotherhood in the 1960s. After that, it becomes political science. I think that was a wise remark, because you can still have it. You can still have a chapter. In India After Gandhi, I say the last two chapters are not history; they are current affairs, which means I myself am not so confident about. But I lay it bare for you to say. So I still write newspaper articles. I write on what happened yesterday. But for a historian to read, as I said, 15 or 20 years distance to understand it. Yeah, I think, Want to wait for a mic? Yeah. There.
Good evening, Dr. Guha. My question to you would be that we have been waiting for the Henderson reports for quite a long time. And it was after some very big political motivations the government actually declassified the Netaji, is in the process of declassifying the Netaji files.
Yeah.
So why does India as a country doesn't have any kind of declassification policy?
Right.
And why do the historians don't come forward in advocating a declassification policy? Why it is always some kind of ad hoc group that advocates for a declassification policy?
No, absolutely. I mean, but you need to... That goes back to the gentleman's question about our lack of respect for law, and we don't have proper procedures. We don't care. It's all, in any case, ad hoc and arbitrary. If it's whether it's an individual going through a traffic light or it's a government setting down a precedent, there must be. I mean, you see, the examples you gave are of pressure, and in fact did the wrong things. I mean, Mr. Modi went and punched many buttons in the National Archives, and all our TV channels followed him. At the end, it revealed nothing. In fact, it revealed the reverse of what they wanted, because they thought Nehru will come out as a bad man, or Subhash Bose will still be alive and come and save us. And what it revealed was that Nehru paid money for the widow to live properly. Right? So, the thing is, and not just the center, the states also. I said we need a declassification policy in each of our states. And this is a huge thing. I mean, this will require, it requires sustained effort. But pending that effort, there's still other material to write. My point was, historians say it's not open. The records of the colonial period are open, so I'll write my thesis on that. But whoever said history is, you see, many people ask me, I mean, there are many historians in this room, so they know the answer to this. But many people ask me, are your books based on internet research? Of course not. You have to go to hundreds of different places and dig up hundreds of different archives. The internet is useful to some extent. So the fact that, shall we say, the Henderson Books report is closed should not be an impediment to you writing on the 1962 war. You can go and do all kinds of other research. You can look at Chinese archives, British archives, American archives, newspapers, oral histories, right? So I think while what you say is true, we need a systematic policy of declassification. The fact that post-47 records are not declassified is used as an excuse by a historian to write the 500th book of the 1930s. That's my complaint. Yeah.
Hello. Hi, sir. This way, extreme right. Yeah, hi.
Go ahead.
My name is Nishtha, and I work at INTAC in the Intangible Cultural Heritage Division.
Yeah.
And currently, we are hosting an exhibition of very relevant photographs.
I got your email. Yeah. And I'm looking forward to coming. Yeah.
Okay. So, in that light, I would like to ask you, what was your inspiration behind pursuing a research on very relevant?
Yeah.
And also, in the same context, what do you think is the status of undertaking or conducting an ethnographic research in the contemporary, considering the contemporary dynamics of our country today? I mean, the kind of funding, the kind of passion you require, because
That's a very good question, and it's close to my heart. So allow me A, to answer it at some length, and B, to be slightly mischievous. The young lady there referred to this book. It's called Savaging the Civilized. It's the book that changed my life, so Penguin should have put it on top. All right. Now, Verrier Elvin, whose photographs are being exhibited, and I've just heard, and I'm going to look forward to visiting it tomorrow or day after, was an extraordinarily fascinating individual. He was an Oxford scholar who came to India as a missionary, left the church, joined Gandhi, fought with Gandhi, partly on questions of celibacy, by the way, and then married an Adivasi girl and did the finest ethnographies of central India, the 30s and 40s. After independence, he went to the northeast and did equally remarkable work in the northeast. And he wrote poetry, he did folklore collections, he did classical work on tribal art. He was an extraordinarily rich and interesting figure. And he changed my life. So that's why I worked on Elvin. I was a student of economics in Delhi University. I was a very bad student of economics. I liked playing cricket more than studying economics. And during my MA, I came across a book of Verrier Elvin in the college library and decided to do a PhD in sociology. And when I shifted to sociology, my professor at the Delhi School of Economics said that Guha's decision is very good. It's good for him and better for economics. It's what's called, those of you who are students of economics actually said that's a Pareto optimum, good for Guha and better for economics. So all right, now, so I studied Elvin and got so interested in him that I wrote a biography, which was the most enjoyable among all my books. It's the favorite of my books. That's why I put it on top, by the way. Penguin doesn't think so because the other books sell better, but get that one. All right. Now, Elvin was an incredibly brave and intrepid man, and the question was, what kind of work you need? By the way, I started as a sociologist, and sociologists, like anthropologists, do field work. Early on, for a variety of reasons, my research became historical, and I was comfortable with that because it's easier to work with documents than with living people, because documents don't answer back. Anthropology is really hard work. It's much harder work than what I do. It requires much more courage. You have to go in arduous, difficult circumstances. Sometimes, at the risk of your life. Elvin worked in Bastar, which is now the epicenter of a civil war between Naxalites and the Indian state, with Adivasis caught in between. It's very, very hard work. Being an anthropologist in Bastar is much harder even than it was in Elvin's time. Fortunately, they are courageous people who do it. The most fearless anthropologist I know is Professor Nandini Sundar of the Delhi School of Economics, who's done fantastic work on Bastar, and whose new book will be out in a few months. And but every time she goes, friends of hers like me are nervous. Will she come back? Because she could be eliminated by the Maoists, she could be eliminated by the Bastar police. Her phones are tapped. By the way, my phone is also tapped, but that's okay. At least I don't go to Bastar. Now, so anthropology is really hard work, and it requires sustained field work. I mean, and Nandini Sundar is an exceptional person. Some of you may be her students, may have read her articles, may know of her work, but it's in many parts of India, apart from the normal middle class hassles of what food you'll get in a village, what facilities there would be, it also can be politically complicated, and it's very hard to win the trust of a community. But some of the best works are by Indian anthropologists. I mean, the previous generation, Andre Bete, M.N. Srinivas, what they told me about India was, incredibly valuable. So, but as for me, I've been to Bastar for a week. Spending a year would probably be, at my age, too difficult. But I hope more people visit your exhibition. Elvin was a great photographer also, by the way. And he documented Adivasi life right from the 30s to the 60s. I don't know what your exhibition has. But it's another way of looking at the world. I mean, it's another way, as rich, arguably more rich, more rewarding than historical analysis based on archives, but infinitely more difficult. Yeah. Good. Yeah.
Good evening, Dr. Guha. We are now seeing a marked rise, some would say a disturbing rise of Hindu nationalism today.
Yeah.
In your view, has there been a period in Indian history, Indian civilization, when there has been such a marked rise before, or would you say this is a new phenomena? And if not, then what this tells us, what this phenomena tells us today?
Yeah. That's a very important question, and I will answer it partly as a historian, partly as a citizen. It's not new. It's happened twice in our history. The first period was immediately post-partition, late 1947, early 1948, when, because of the horrific violence in partition and the expulsion of Hindus and Sikhs from West Punjab by the Pakistanis, there were calls for retribution in northern India because of how much the Hindus and Sikhs had suffered. And leading the calls for retributions was the RSS. And had Gandhi not died, Gandhi then fasted for religious peace in Bengal and in Delhi, and Gandhi's death so mortified the Hindus that for a period of and brought Patel and Nehru together, that for a period of 10 or 15 years, there was religious peace. So the first incident was intense 46-47. The second incident, which was much more important, and which I personally witnessed and lived through, some of the people in the audience did, but not you, was the Ram Janmabhoomi movement from about 1986 to 1993, which led a trail of devastation, social devastation in its wake. Across northern and western India, there were a series of Hindu-Muslim riots. Thousands of people died. And you could date it from maybe 1986 and ending in 2002 with the Gujarat riots. And it really polarized opinion the way it is polarizing opinion now. And as a historian, I would say it was even more dangerous than what happened today. I'm not undermining what, but as a historian, I'm giving you the perspective of a historian. So the first 47-48 was brief and intense. It could have blown massively out of proportion had Gandhi not been martyred. I mean, Gandhi's martyrdom saved India and saved religious tolerance and pluralism in India. Right. And that will be the subject of the second volume of my Gandhi biography. The 80s and the 90s massively shifted the politics of India towards the right, the rise of the BJP. And it was much more widespread than is what is happening today. Because many parts of northern and western India, we talk about UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Maharashtra and Gujarat, was seriously affected not only in cities but in villages. There were divisions. And at the same time, you had the expulsion of the Pandits in Kashmir in that same decade, which intensified polarization on both sides. Because while in northern and western India, radical Hindus were persecuting Muslims, in Kashmir, radical Muslims were persecuting Hindus. So that should never be forgotten. That what happened in Kashmir and what happened to the Sikhs also in Delhi and elsewhere. That was the time. So that was worse than what is happening today. But because I have lived through it and I have seen how much damage that did to our social, our cultural, our political and our intellectual fabric, I worry about today too, that it should not escalate to that. So it's by no means as bad as what happened in the 80s and 90s. But it is by no means as bad because it is at the moment geographically confined. I live in Bangalore. There is no impact of this. In Kolkata and Bihar, large parts of Maharashtra, no impact of this. But what my UP is worrying, because UP is a large state, that's why the stakes are highest. And I mentioned Amit Shah, and I said something not complimentary about Amit Shah some time ago. The second, in my view, the two most dangerous politicians in India today are Amit Shah and Azam Khan. With Mulayam Singh maybe being number 3. All right. Because it's such a large state and it is 250 million people. So we really have to worry about what will happen in the UP elections and whether that election is run. But so far, to answer your question, although it is worrying, what happened in the 80s and 90s was much worse, but that should not be consoling. Because we have been warned of what damage religious polarization can do. Religious pluralism in India was always extremely fragile and hard won. And we have to be vigilant about fundamentalists on all sides, and particularly on my side, our side, because I think this is something I should say for those of you who know my writings and the fact that I am frequently criticized for being soft on Islamic terror. I should say this for the record as a historian. Globally, Islamic terror is a very, very dangerous phenomenon. But within India, globally, Islamic terrorism is a danger to the survival of human civilization. But in India, because Hindus are 85%, Hindu terror or Hindu fundamentalism is much more dangerous than Islamic fundamentalism. Within my country, within my world, I'm very worried about Islamic terror. And I don't buy those arguments that it's only a reaction to the West and it's a clash of civilizations and it was all caused by George Bush. No. There's something very dark and dangerous about Islamic terrorism. But that's about my world and my species. But about my country, which I love dearly, I'm terrified at the thought of Hindu majoritarianism. Because that's what we were not. If India was anything, if people like Gandhi wanted India to be anything, India was not to be a Hindu Pakistan. That's the most important thing. And that is something we must be careful about, vigilant about, but not apocalyptic about. Not apocalyptic about. So to say this is Hitler all over again or this is the emergency is not going to help us. We have to look at the problem, understand how serious or how trivial it is with a sober head, not to exaggerate. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah. I'll come to you next time. Yeah.
Good morning, sir. Good evening, sir. As a reader, my question is that what is the reasons of this minority complex in majority Hinduism? I mean, the historical reason.
I think this is. It's a reason of the last. You see, these are. By the way, I was talking to a friend yesterday, a foreign friend who could put it in perspective, and he said something very interesting. He said it's common to Jews in Israel, and to Muslims in Egypt, and to Muslims in Turkey, and to Hindus here. There's a rise of a right-wing party. Netanyahu is like Modi, or Modi's party. Likud is like the BJP. Forget individuals. Likud is like the BJP. The AKP in Turkey is like the BJP in Likud. Muslims are a majority in Turkey. Jews are a majority in Israel. But they're nurturing these wounds. We were colonized by the Christians, say, the Turkish Muslim radicals say we were colonized by the Christians. We are nursing. America did this to us. Then Israel says the Arabs all surround us. They will take over our land. We say we were ruled by the Muslims. I think one of the unfortunate lapses in Mr. Modi's otherwise very well orchestrated campaign was when he won the campaign and went to Parliament and said something about 1200 saal ki gulami, ab khatam ho gayi. All right. Now, so this nurturing of wounds, we were, and it's always grievances, always the past. Unhone humko ye kiya, aur ye kiya, aur ye kiya, aur ye kiya. Right. So it's common, even in Israel, the Jews are in a majority. In Turkey, the Muslims are in a majority. And they're still feeling that someone is going to take over our land, someone is going to, So this grievance, hurt, anger, identification of all kinds of enemies, real or imaginary, it's common. Not just, unfortunately, of whatever. I don't know whether it gives us consolation, but maybe it should. It's not just we Hindus, but Jews in Israel are behaving in a similar way. Yeah.
Sir, I'm Hridesh from NDTV. Just wanted to ask one question. One of the worst onslaughts we have seen in last few decades, which is least talked about, is the environmental damage, which we have been suffering. All parts of India, Central India, or be it Uttarakhand, which is absolutely damaged by this streak of dams we are building on our rivers. So, and is it not partly because urban middle class doesn't see environment as an asset, and every time you do an environmental story, it looks like impediment to growth or something like that. So, as a historian, how do you see the future of environmental history is being written, or what's your suggestion? I mean, how it should be written, especially in as I said, in the terms of ecological asset, I see it.
No, that's a very good question, and thank you for asking it, because I began my career as an environmental historian and spent the first 10 or 15 years writing, including Environmentalism, a Global History, which should be somewhere here. It's quite interesting. In the 80s, when the environmental movement in India began. Well, first thing I'd say in answer to your question, something you know, but maybe others don't know so clearly, that environmentalism in India is essentially an environmentalism of the poor. It's not an elite phenomenon. It's dismissed by politicians as being only an upper class fad. First we'll develop, then we'll grow, then we'll clean up. But that is nonsense. It is the poor whose lives are affected by deforestation, by the depletion of groundwater aquifers, it's the farmers, chemical contamination, river pollution affects fisherfolk, acquisition of grazing land by expanding cities affects pastoralists and so on. So, environmentalism in India, environmental sustainability should be something that is seen as crucial to the lives of a majority of Indians. Now, in the 80s, there was a vigorous environmental movement in India. And it was led by mostly Gandhian activists in the countryside, talking about the impact on peasant and pastoral life by rampant deforestation, industrial pollution, and building of dams and so on. And this activism brought the historians and journalism. They were fantastic environmental journalists who were doing outstanding work. Anil Agarwal, whose CSC I think still has an office in the Habitat Center, was one of our greatest environmental journalists. Daryl DeMonte, who's going to speak I think tomorrow or day after at the India International Center. Kalpana Sharma, Usha Rai, who I think lives in Delhi. Outstanding environmental journalists who reported on the impact of environmental degradation on the lives of ordinary Indians all across. The Bhopal gas tragedy was first covered by a Hindi journalist called Rajkumar Keswani. And scholars like me were inspired by the activists and the journalists to do serious historical studies. Now then liberalization happened. And we embraced the market with a vengeance. We go from one extreme to extreme. We went from being completely paranoid and suspicious about entrepreneurs to saying entrepreneurship is everything, the market is everything, and we recklessly abandoned all environmental constraints. And every newspaper in India had an environmental reporter. Over the last 10 years, every environmental reporter has either been laid off or being redesignated a stock market correspondent. Okay, so we went from one extreme to another. And environmentalists were demonized as holding up the party, holding up growth, where all they were pointing to was the unsustainability of the models of economic development that we are adopting, of which Gandhi had warned against as early as 1928. He said, if India industrializes after the manner of the West, we will strip the world bare like locusts. That is, add China to that. China and India will strip the world bare like locusts. Now, what happened, to answer your question, was historians got more and more interested. So historians started doing very good work, and they continue to do very good work. one of the reasons I don't myself write environmental history is that there are so many good young historians doing much better work than I ever could, including some at JNU and Ashoka and Delhi University and elsewhere. But it's become an academic discourse. The activists are old and tired, and the journalists have no visibility. There's some very good journalists on TV, but they don't get a chance. I mean, Bahar Dutt is one. On the Uttarakhand earthquake, there are two journalists in NDTV, of course, Hitesh Joshi and Sushil Bhanguna. They did very good work, but there's not enough. I mean, somehow media proprietors, and not just media proprietors, the middle class has been persuaded that the only thing stopping India becoming Singapore writ large are the environmental activists. And I'll tell you one story about it, because it's an important question. And I won't name the journalist. There's one journalist who so hates environmentalists so much that one would think that this journalist is employed by CIA or so whatever. But anyway, the person this journalist hates most is Medha Patkar. And every 6 months, this columnist attacks Medha Patkar. And then I found, studying the attacks on Medha Patkar, that the journalist lives in Delhi. There's a cyclical, almost climatological regularity to these attacks. So you're in Delhi in May, the mercury is getting hotter, 43, 44, 45, 46. The transformer blows, the AC goes, you're sitting in your air-conditioned cabin, sweat is falling down, and you say it's May because Medha Patkar stopped the Narmada Dam. Go 6 months on to December, Delhi is icy cold, it's snowed in Shimla, the winds are coming down, and you're sitting in your air-conditioned study. This time it's the heater that blows. And you're shivering, you can't even write, and you say it's that damn Medha Patkar that's responsible. Whereas actually it's the antiquated transformers and the theft of electricity in Delhi that's responsible, right? But anyway, so I noticed that actually it's true, there was a climatological pattern. So the pathology where, it's like this, Indians are so prone to conspiracy theories. And why are we not a great superpower? Because Subhash Bose didn't come back. Okay. Why will we never become a great superpower? Because Medha Patkar is protesting against the Narmada Dam. So I think, I'm sorry to trivialize it, but that's a very serious question. I think, in a recent column in the Hindustan Times, I said this. I said, this is a really, and I got some incredibly sarcastic remarks from, I regret to say, some JNU students. What is he talking about? The environmental problem. Just travel anywhere in the countryside, and you notice how much the abuse of our environment affects the daily lives of hundreds of millions of Indians, even in this city, air pollution, and how all of you suffer. So I think it's very important that this becomes part of, and it's quick bucks. This government, they want to dismantle every environmental regulation. Part of it may be corruption, but it's more dangerous than corruption. It's ideological blindness. It's the belief that environmentalists are anti-progress, anti-development, whereas actually what they are for is for a safe future for our children and our grandchildren. You. I don't know how much more time you have. Who's here? Himali? Okay, we have maybe 10 minutes.
Hello, good evening, sir. My name is Shweta, and I'm a student at Lady Shri Ram College. And I'm studying psychology. So my concern would be that you spoke about disciplinary boundaries in Indian universities regarding the study of history and political science, and how history from a particular date becomes political science. My question is just the reverse of this situation. So, in the sense, isn't today's political science the history of tomorrow? And so, in this sense, aren't chronology and memory then game changers in our academic pursuits?
The last thing, chronology and memory?
The game changers in our academic pursuits.
No, you're right that today's anthropology or today's political science, it can feed into tomorrow's history. But it doesn't mean it's tomorrow, because historians use other kinds of methods. You see, they will have to look at what is written in 1990 by political scientists and justify it. So it is true that, and I did not mean to diminish the importance of political science or of anthropology. And, these disciplines are often defined by their methods. Anthropologists do intensive fieldwork, political scientists do surveys, And historians have a distance and then look at the different kinds of archival material. But it is important that chronology and memory also get into the disciplinary mindset of political scientists and anthropologists. So political scientists become more historical, anthropologists become more historical, is I think also necessary. I think a historical perspective is important for all kinds of people. I mean, ordinary citizens too. And somehow the sense that anthropology lives only in the present and history lives only in the past is problematic. And one of the merits of Nandini Sundar's work is that actually she combines anthropology and history. If you read her work, she's one of the few anthropologists who not only does really serious and difficult and rigorous field work, she has a proper interest in history, which makes her work even more, useful. Hence, to all of us. Yeah, there's someone right at the back. Yeah. You want to shout or you want to go? Yeah.
So, good.
I'll come back here then. I'll come back here. Yeah. When you come and take it. Yeah.
Good evening, sir. So my question to you would be that how is the academic discourse going to be affected by the rise of anti-intellectualism that we witness in the present day scenario? Like JNU dissenters, they are actually a binary is being created between them and the soldiers, and they are being told that you are doing nothing with your research work and you should rather go at the frontiers and fight for the country because you are useless.
Yeah. No, I think this kind of... as I said, everything has its place. Soldiers have their place. Scholars also have their place. And clearly, I believe, and I'm sure everyone in JNU believes, that the role of soldiers is more important than that of scholars. In my view, the role of teachers and doctors is much more important than the role of writers. I said this in a talk I gave 3 days ago. I'm a writer, I don't teach. I write only for teachers and doctors are doing much more important work than me. But everyone has their role, and scholarship also has a part to play in understanding, in molding the national consciousness, what we are as a culture, civilization, how we should be, how we can moderate our conflicts, how we can understand ourselves deeper. So these vulgar denunciations of scholars or scholarship or universities is deeply unfortunate. All right. Now, but one should not exaggerate how widespread it is. One of the problems is that our media is massively Delhi-centered. A Tamil friend of mine who's now dead used to say famously that Delhi is a capital in search of a country. All right. Now, and that's most true of our media. It's true, hell of a lot true of our politicians, by the way. It's very true of our politicians. It's true of Delhi intellectuals. It's true most of all of our Delhi media. So I think, though what is happening around JNU is worrisome, I think there are contrary trends in different parts of India. And the fact that so many of you have come for Spring Fever, and you'll come tomorrow and day after, is a sign that many people, not all of them by means, not even a small minority of them studying at JNU, are interested in scholarship and books. And this would be true in Mumbai, it would be in Bangalore, it would be in Kochi, it would be in Goa. I mean, literary festivals all over. Books are being read, are being discussed. So, I think the attack on our university is unfortunate and ill-timed. But I think ordinary Indians are interested in scholarship. They're interested in books more than they ever were before. There's a much greater interest in history among non-history students than there ever was before. Otherwise, I would be standing here today. 30 years ago, they were probably historians better than me, working in this country. But they could make a living writing books the way I do, right? So I think don't be too, it's worrying, but it's not as despairing as you think. And I think most publishers will also tell you, that the book market for serious stuff is reasonably healthy. So I think, I think it's the media and the discourse is distorted by a Delhi-centered presentation. And things could be more hopeful, elsewhere in India.
Dr. Guha, this is here.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Yeah. Go ahead.
This has to do with your remark about no history of Bengal has been written.
Yeah.
There are lots of coffee table books on Kolkata because that's the only city that Bengal is known as. In Dhaka, when I was there, I found they had books on Nawabs of Bengal, masjids and mosques of Bengal. Most books will be available in Dhaka. But in Kolkata, there is coffee table books. But one thing I found very strange was decennial census in its report, district census handbook, and the gazetteer, state gazetteer. It has a lot of the, not political, but history, cultural, and economy of a state.
Yeah.
So perhaps you could find some hidden things in the district gazetteer.
That's true, yeah. I think you're right. I mean, at least the 50s and 60s, there were some very good gazetteers written. But I was thinking more of, gazetteers were constrained by being official publications. So I was thinking more of serious scholarly work on post-colonial Bengal. I mean, to underline, the colonial Bengal is massively studied, massively overstudied. I used to have a Bengali friend who's a historian, who used to say, only partly in jest, I am the only Bengali historian who has not written on Bankim. All right. But how many Bengali historians have written on Mahashweta Devi, I would like to know. Because that's my point, that post-colonial history is somehow given short shrift by scholars. And some of that might be changing, but it's not changing fast enough. And I would urge the young people in this audience to consider, and you don't even have to be trained as a historian. Harish Damodar, whom I mentioned, is an economic journalist. But his social history of the Indian capitalist class is an absolute model. And, if you are not trained in history, if you are willing to do the hard work, you can become a historian. If you are not trained in physics, you can never become a physicist. Yeah. So that would be... But I think we are probably last...
sir. Good evening, sir. Good evening. This side, sir. Your left. Extreme left, sir.
Extreme left. Okay, your last question.
Okay. Sir, good evening, sir. I'm sitting at extreme left, but I'm not a leftist, maybe.
Last question. What did you say?
I'm sitting on extreme left. I'm sitting on your extreme left, but I'm not a leftist.
Yeah.
Anyway, I have just picked one sentence from your question and answer session that was going on, and I'm still stuck up on that. That somehow this thing rightist or this conservative people are usually nowadays in India, they are not intellectuals.
Yeah.
The way means you have put in something like that. So picking that line means I was thinking about that, and I find that this is happening just because of the legacies, just because of the leftist legacies that all the universities have inherited from that Nehruvian ideology post 1950 and 60s.
Right.
So and I have also come to know that Professor Rakesh Sinha, he had to struggle a lot to write on the rightist subject, to start his career, and dissertation on rightist subject. No one was accepting that. And he was also forced to change that, but he didn't change, and he went ahead with that. So you don't think that this this conservative intellectuals are not coming because there is not this thing of patronage. Patronage is nurturing, and patronage is also very important.
I answered that question partly. You're right. That's part of the reason. But let me tell you that the examples you give don't inspire much confidence that there will be serious conservative history. Because if you appear on television every day on 3 channels, you're not going to write a good book. Let me tell you that. All right. Now, and this kind of complaints, they didn't let me. You know where I did my PhD? IIM Calcutta. First and last sociology student from IIM Calcutta. When I started my environmental research, every historian told me it's rubbish. You can't do it. The leftists said environmentalism is a bourgeois deviation from the class struggle. What are you doing? I didn't listen to them. Right. So this complaint, the complaints of the people you've been talking to are like the complaints of Hindus that the Muslims oppressed them 2,000 years ago. It's the Nehruvian historians that stop me from writing history. What is stopping you? Write a book, get it published. Do research so solid that even the leftists will have to acknowledge you. Do that. And I think that's what a good conservative historian would do, rather than complain. Scholarship is hard work, my friend. Whether you're leftist or rightist or centrist or anythingist. Scholarship is hard work. It means hours and hours and years of digging, of searching, of traveling, of reflecting, of writing, of rewriting, of cutting, of changing. It is hard work. And if the rightists who complain about the Nehruvian domination would spend less time complaining and more time working, we may actually have one day a conservative intellectual tradition in this country, because we need it. If you read my article on why there is not a conservative intellectual tradition, it's partly because, it's easy to complain about the other side. Unhone humko nahi diya. Let Smriti Irani be education minister for 20 years. And if she can create a proper tradition of conservative intellectuals, I'm willing to let her be in that job for 20 years. But what she's done in the first 15 months, don't seem to suggest that we are anywhere near getting conservative intellectuals, right? I mean, this guy who was appointed head of ICHR, he's never published a paper in his life. Now, so I think it's sad, it's depressing. But you see, it goes back to this question about poor Nehru has been dead 51 years and you're still blaming him. What have we been doing all this while? The BJP is in power in so many states. It's been in power in Gujarat for 20 years. Has it created a single good scholar in Gujarat? No. What they have done in those 20 years, they've destroyed MS University because the RSS wanted to destroy MS University. So I think as long as the RSS has the role it has in our political dispensation, you will never get right-wing intellectuals in this country. You will get right-wing ideologues, not right-wing intellectuals. That would be what I would say. And that is sad, because we do need, for a healthy discourse, I need people on my left and my right. I should say, by the way, that when I travel abroad, I do not read left-wing journals. I subscribe to The Spectator and not to The New Statesman. The Spectator is a conservative right-wing British publication, high quality. The New Statesman is a left-wing British publication, high quality, because I don't want to read the New Statesman. It can't challenge me. It'll just confirm my prejudices, right? But I want to read The Spectator. And I'm challenged by The Spectator because it is conservative thought of a high quality. And you see, if you read, I've been reading, I'm a great admirer of Rajaji, by the way, and I once said long ago that, I sometimes say I'm a conservative liberal socialist. Because I do take from socialism the idea of equality, including gender equality. I do take from liberalism the idea of freedom of speech, individual rights. And I do take from conservatism the sense that there is something in our tradition worthy of conserving. Even conservation, which is the root of the environmental movement, comes from conserve. Keep our forests, keep our waters, our music. I mean, what could be greater than our classical music, right? I want to conserve. I don't want it to be destroyed by, Hollywood pop. I don't want Test cricket to be destroyed by T20. I'm a conservative. I'm a cricketing conservative, right? So I think there are very valuable aspects in being a conservative. But unfortunately, the RSS doesn't cut the bill. They are a bunch of low-level ideologues. And it's truly sad. It's truly sad because there were many people. I'll end by saying there were many, many people. I don't know how many people in this room, but there were many, many people all across India who were so disgusted by the corruption and the cronyism and the dynastic culture of the Congress party, rightly so, that they voted for Narendra Modi and the BJP. But they didn't think they'll get the RSS. They thought they'll get something else. And in that sense, that is really where I wish we would. I mean, our intellectual culture would be much richer if we had half a dozen good conservative intellectuals. They start something, but look at them. They start something they said we're going to start our own festival in Goa every year. I think it's called, Idea India, something, India Inc., something. The first year is inaugurated by Subramaniam Swami, right? The second year is inaugurated by Sri Sri Ravi Shankar. Are you going to get scholarship out of this? Are you going to serious? I mean, what are we talking about? It's truly sad because I wish we did. I mean, as Indians, we deserve good left-wing intellectuals, good centrist intellectuals, and good right-wing intellectuals too. Thank you.
Thank you.